Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love.
All right, so the next block, verses 24 and 25 of chapter 23, you shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. It's kind of important to recall that the first half of this chapter was dealing with various instructions pertaining to their worship and the purity of their worship, and we spent a lot of time talking about that latter aspect of it last week. Talked about the Sabbath, talked about the feast, talked about all of those things. You get those three verses that we ended with last time and that we covered during the introduction, where he says, I'm going to be with you, I'm engaging with you, I've sent a messenger to you. And then he goes right back into this discussion of do not worship the idols and the gods of the people of this land that you're going to be led to. As is often the case, they didn't necessarily always live up to the commandment. But God is again just stressing that you shall have no other gods before me. That he's a jealous God. That it's not okay to mix, which we talked about a lot last week in the middle of the lesson last week. It's not okay to mix. It's not okay to keep one foot in the camp of acknowledging God and then put a foot in the camp of the gods of the world. That is a place that a lot of people try to walk through. And you have that theme that appears many times throughout the scriptures. Where at one point you might remember the prophet doing battle on Mount Carmel with the Baal. And he actually asked them, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? You have the same thing when Joshua was leading the people in the land. Just choose you this day whom you will serve. Either the gods of our fathers, the previous gods that we once believed in, or the God who's delivered us from our bondage and brought us to this place. Choose you this day whom you will serve. It's the same choice. And by the way, it's the same choice we face today. All of those idols, what did they represent? Okay, The Greeks did in fact recognize that there's some gods out there they didn't know, and they did erect an idol to an unknown God. But where did they get the ideas for the various idols? Let's just look at the Egyptian gods, because we've studied them not all that long ago. They had a god that was represented by what? A calf. They had a god that was represented by a scarab beetle. They had a god that was represented, or that stood for various things. All of these earthly phenomenon, and the scarab beetle had an interesting role in their. By the way, that was just iconology. That wasn't the god. The beetle wasn't the god. The beetle just represented the god. The god was actually Ra, and he was the sun god. And the beetle was rolling the sun across the sky. That's how they explain the sun coming up and going down every day. These idols represent nature, the material world, the experiences and the things that they see. If you get to the Roman gods, what are their gods named for? Anybody know? And Jupiter and Mars and Saturn. And it was not by accident that those gods were associated with the planets of our solar system, or that the planets of our solar system were given the names of those gods. Is maybe the way we should express it.
Sexual desires too.
Absolutely. They almost all had a fertility god that played two roles, by the way. The fertility god wasn't just the sexual aspect of things. The fertility god was also what? Crops and the production of the land. Well, they certainly seem to have, if history is correct, seem to have enthusiastically engaged in the worship of those gods. The Greek society did as well with their gods. In fact, the Greek society was so engaged in such things, and I suspect Roman society as well, that their temples were staffed with what? Prostitutes that facilitated, yes, that's what they called it. So, it's
they put them up top of the mountains, and nobody can really see them. If they populated the valley, they put it down, they put these contingent worships up at the top of the mountain. You don't have observation.
And so if you go to Romans 1, for instance, and we talk about this letter that was written to the Romans. For the wrath of, it's verse 18, wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. What should we see in creation? We should see God's power in his existence. But even though they knew God, it says, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God, which is what nature is supposed to be, the glory of the incorruptible God, they exchanged that for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and of four-footed animals and crawling creatures. It's simply taking the glory that belongs to God and giving it to what? To the creation, to ourselves and to other things. Four-footed beasts and birds, and some people even give that power to the stars, right? They believe that the position of the stars can give insight into what's going to happen and what your fortune is going to be and how well things are going to work out and all sorts of things like that. That is simply taking glory that ought to go to an incorruptible God and ascribing it to his creation. That is essentially what he is warning them against doing. Don't mix worship of me with the things that people are doing with these false gods that they have created in their own mind that reflect the image of corruptible creation. You shall not worship their gods or serve them or do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces. When you go in there, you just got to wipe the slate clean and tear all of that stuff down. But you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. There shall be no one miscarrying or barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. By the way, I don't think that was intended to be an absolute promise, but I do think that it was a general promise that is reflected historically in all people who follow God. Throughout the testimony of the scriptures, what happens when people follow God? They're blessed and they prosper. What happens when they turn away from God? They forfeit those blessings. Does that mean that time and chance doesn't affect the people of God? No. But on the whole, you can see that the people of God are blessed. The people that are not godly ultimately are not blessed. By the way, are there time periods where the people who are not godly seem to be blessed? Yeah, let's just think about a couple of nations. What about the Philistines? Did the Philistines ever have any success? Were they strong and powerful? Did they have a great army? Did they have wealth and influence? Absolutely. What happened to the Philistines? Where are they at? The Assyrians. Did the Assyrians look to be successful and have prosperity and power and influence in the world? Yes. Where are the Assyrians? The Persians, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks. It's not saying that people who don't serve God never enjoy periods of prosperity, but those things do not last. By the way, the instructions of the scriptures are very clear about that. Even all the way to the point of the book of Revelation, which tells you not to look at the world and think that the side of right is going to be defeated just because it looks dark and dreary and they seem to be successful, because in the end, what's going to happen? God will triumph. So it's not an absolute promise that there would never be a miscarriage, but it is a general promise that they would prosper and do well. By the way, it dates all the way back to Abraham, right? He promised Abraham that through his seed, a nation would come up that would be as multitudinous as the dust, that there would be as many descendants to Abraham as the stars of the heavens, innumerable. How many sons did he have? One. How did he have them innumerable descendants? Because God made them to prosper. What happened when that small group of, I want to say it's 70 something, if memory serves me correct from our study in Genesis, that small group of Joseph's family that moved to Egypt, what happened to that group in Egypt? They prospered and did well and were blessed and multiplied to the point that it made the Egyptians uncomfortable. That's what ultimately led to their enslavement, is the Egyptians were threatened by them because they were prospering so well. The people of God do have difficult periods, but generally speaking, he's saying, you'll be blessed. By the way, did his life look blessed most of the time? His brothers hated him. And then his brothers, well, they wanted to kill him, but thanks to one of them, that did not happen. And instead, he was sold into slavery. And then he got sold to another man and then put in prison and left in prison. There's a lot of his life that looks like, that's, how many of y'all want to live that life? Is that the life people aspire to? To be hated by their family, sold into slavery, carried off to a foreign land away from your parents, and then falsely accused of a crime that you didn't do and thrown in prison? Is that the life that people map out for themselves and say, this is what a successful life looks like? Yet what ended up happening to Joseph? He became the ruler of Egypt, and he saved his family. So for many years, it didn't look like God was blessing him, but God's providence was with him at all times, bringing him to the place that he was brought to do the work that he was set to do. That's generally what he's saying here. If you will serve me, you will. Now, why do people serve these foreign gods? Let's limit it to the discussion of the Old Testament and the children of Israel. For those of us that are familiar with the story, why did they turn to these other nations and these other gods? What were they looking for? Help and prosperity. That's what they were looking for in almost every case. They were marrying into these other nations. Why? They wanted to be like them, and if you're married to them, they don't attack you and kill you. A lot of the marriages of kings of Israel, especially people like Solomon, were based on what? Political alliances. Solomon, the king of Israel, marries the daughter of another king, so now he's part of that family. And now the nations can be at peace. By the way, that didn't end with the Bible either. That goes all through history. That's what men do. Sometimes those joining of families is really odd. You get a mix of views and ideas, and strange couples arise from those kinds of. But that's what, and the whole idea is, do you know what? I'm going to inoculate myself from the problem. So when Ahab, for instance, marries Jezebel, what does Jezebel do? She brings the false idols of her people into Israel. Did they initially just go, oh, well, God's not real, let me follow these people? That's not what they did initially. What did they do? They tried to mix it. They tried to continue to honor God and honor the Baals. He's saying, don't do that. Don't mix with these people. Don't become like them. Don't do what, that's what's interesting about this to me is his progression here. You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them. I think that's talking about the gods. Nor do according to their deeds. Now, the gods don't have any deeds. So who's the there referred to when he says, nor do according to their deeds? The people who serve those gods. Don't live like they live. Don't engage in the behaviors that they engage in. Don't hold the value system that they hold. Listen, there's all sorts of immorality and injustice that arose from the mindset of these idolaters. You get to Roman society, for instance, and a Roman man took if he was a nobleman at all, he took a wife from another noble family to hold his station in society. But slaves, well, you could use them however you wanted. And they did. Male slaves, female slaves, didn't matter. And if a slave died, oh well, because they dehumanized those people. They didn't see them as equals, as brethren. That's what happens when you stop following God and you start pursuing materialistic values and attitudes that arise from men.
I read Ezekiel 16, we're told that the Israelites were worse off than the people they replaced.
I'm trying to remember, I can't remember which one of the prophets said it now, but he actually told them at one point that they were worse than the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, who God destroyed. Think about that. Verse 27. He promises to drive out their enemies, but notice how he says he's going to do it. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you, and I will send hornets ahead of you so that they may drive out the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Hittites before you. Let's see, I don't want to stop yet. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will deliver them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. So he tells them up front that this is going to be a process, that it's going to take not 1 year, but years to accomplish. And he even gives them reasons why. If they had all just been driven out automatically, what does he suggest the result of that would be? The land would revert back to wild, and the animal population, the wild animal population would, listen to how he says this. Let's back up. I will not drive them out before you in a singular, verse 29, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. If they'd all just gone and then Israel, they could not have done what Israel ended up doing. Israel ended up walking into cities in some cases and just taking them over. And crops in the field. And usable, workable land. which led them to prosperity. And God says, I'm doing it, and I'm doing it this way for a reason. I want you to know right now as you go in. They should never have expected an immediate victory. And they also should not have expected everything to happen because of the battleground. Because he says, look, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to cause confusion. I'm going to send, what does he name here in this text? Hornets. If in some cases we know that he used locusts and various things to cause natural issues. Even with the children of Israel, when he disciplined them, at least on one occasion, he opened up the earth and swallowed people with the earth. So he's explaining that it's not all going to be battlefield success. It's going to take time. I'm going to do this little by little. You're going to get the land. Just follow my commands. By the way, the first command he gives them, when they cross that river, the first city they come to is what? Anybody remember? Okay. And they fight that battle. And then the second place they get is Jericho. And he says with Jericho, what? Okay, we got a wall here, guys. So this is what I need you to do. Just walk around the wall once a day. Don't make a sound. Just walk around the wall. Now, what kind of a battle plan is that? How's that going to win the city? Well, it's not, except for what? Except for God said, if you do what I tell you to do, I will give you the land little by little. Just trust me. We walk by faith and not by sight.
They walk by faith and they love God and they can see idols in other countries. It was more tangible to us.
Yes, and it was definitely more tangible. But beyond that, what you ended up doing was projecting onto the idol things that God should have received credit for. And all that means is I have a tangible object to look at. Again, the idol was not the God. The idol was an icon of the God.
You see that base of the mountain when they made the golden calf, right? Like when people got together and said to Aaron, make us this God. We don't know this God that took us out of Egypt. Make an idol of him for us.
And the interesting part about that is what led to that was actually twofold, and it has something to do with what Howard mentioned just a moment ago, and that's this. They could not see God. They did not hear God. They were getting their information from Moses, and Moses had gone up into the mountain. He had been there for some time, and what did they become afraid of? They wouldn't see him again either. Now, would Moses' presence have changed anything that had happened leading up to that day? And the answer is no. His absence didn't change any of it either. God had still done all the things that he did and brought them to that point, and God was still doing his thing. What they were lacking was a tangible, immediate connection. They were having to wait. Which, by the way, is what we have to do. We have to wait. We have to wait for the resurrection. We have to wait for our reward.
Especially in the Catholic Church. Everything moves and doesn't move, weeks and doesn't move.
We like things. We like things that we can put our hands on, that we can see, that we can smell, that we can taste, that we can touch.
Which is pretty interesting because
Amounts to idolatry. Because covetousness is really another name for materialism. I will fix your boundary. We're out of time, but I'm going to get through verse 33 real quick, and then we'll talk about all of these things next time that we meet. I will fix your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates, and I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. I'm going to do all this for you. It's guaranteed. I'm promising you these things. You go in and do it. Don't make any agreements with them. They shall not live in your land lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Now, we know verse 33 is true because we have the record of them doing that very thing and it becoming a snare to them. Verse 33 is true, guess what? All the other promises can be seen to be true as well. They should have known and not worried. Were they going to be successful? Were they going to get the land? Were they going to win the battles? It was promised. It may not happen when, where, and how that they imagined, but it was certain to happen. And anyone with faith would know that. So when the 12 spies eventually were sent into the land, 2 of them came back not afraid of what they found because of how big and great and strong they looked, but saying what? God's given them to our hands. We don't have anything to worry about. Let's go do it. That's what it ought to look like. All right. Got to stop. Thanks for your presence and participation tonight.
Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story.